I have been to Chicagoland many, many times to film trains. Whether it was the Big Boy, the CPKC Power, or Union Pacific, there was always something in Chicagoland that I could not get back home. However, there was something that I had never seen in the area. The action in the south side of Chicago, around Hegewisch and Hammond, Indiana, namely the Indiana Harbor Belt and South Shore multiple units. And so, on March 15th, 2025, I decided to take the journey to the rather sketchy bits of Chicagoland to catch some of those rare units. The first stop was going to be Norfolk Southern's Hegewisch Yard, but we got a little jump scared on the way by this! Maryland Pig Iron Factory number 780. And as you can very clearly tell, this thing is still in original Conrail paint, and with some Lehigh Valley red shining through. If you look closely at the Conrail logo, you can even see the VAL from Lehigh Valley underneath it. This thing works here at the Maryland Pig Iron Factory in Hegewisch, and man, I'm so glad that it's still around. To my knowledge, this is the only Conrail SW Series switcher left in original paint anywhere, even in preservation. And it's certainly the last locomotive with any traces of Lehigh Valley paint on it in revenue service. Once we arrived at the yard, which is visible from the nearby Hegewisch Marsh Park, we immediately saw a silver South Shore multiple unit set blasting across the iconic bridge. My main motivation for going to this yard was to get a shot of one of the Norfolk Southern GP33 Ecos. However, as you can see, the shot is blurry. Normally I would have just pointed my camera lens through the gap in the fence like I did earlier and would do later on this trip, except it was an electric fence, and my camera is kind of made of metal. So yeah, that wasn't happening. And since my camcorder stubbornly refuses to focus on anything behind fences, this is the best shot I got. See, the reason we decided to go to that spot first was because the idea was that we were going to go to the farthest west spot first and then make our way east so that by the time we were done, we would practically be back home. So, following that convention, we went east to the next spot, the Hegewisch South Shore Station. There's a yard just across from the platform here, and we thought maybe there'll be some South Shore power parked in the yard. There was absolutely nothing. After that, we moved down to the next spot, which is very nearby, the Indiana Harbor Belt's Burnham Yard, which is also in Hegewisch. Along the way, we passed by most of South Shore's Hegewisch Yard and didn't really see any locos besides these two Jeeps that were hiding behind some South Shore rolling stock. When we arrived at Burnham, we realized it wasn't very accessible, but there was this IHB SW1500 sitting in practically the only visible spot, and another one very far away switching in the yard. That didn't really go too well, and so we abandoned Burnham Yard and the South Shore for a while and decided to head down to the Indiana Harbor Belt's Gibson Yard. First, we went over on the Columbia Avenue overpass. We passed over the overpass for the first time just to check and see if there was anything worthwhile up on the overpass. Then, we saw a war bonnet, number 743, sitting directly underneath the overpass. I was very excited because, as some of my longtime fans might know, I have a wall of fake bonnet scams, and I really have never caught a fake bonnet that well ever in my entire rail fanning career. And since this one was parked, or we assumed tied down, right underneath the overpass, and there was a sidewalk, we assumed there is no way it can scam us. And I literally said, I can't see any way that they could scam us this time. Then, as we turned around and headed back over the overpass to get to the place where we could actually park, this happened.
Oh man, dude, that's rough.
Yep, that vaguely gray mess of pixels is the war bonnet. In fact, it wasn't tied down, and the conductor had just gotten out to flip a switch to send it farther into Gibson Yard. I really didn't want to do this, but I guess I have to add another thing to the wall of fake bonnet scams. After that, we sat up on the overpass, defeated for a while, and this set of auto racks started reversing into the yard. We weren't exactly sure what locomotive was pushing it at the time because it was too far away. The idea was we were going to wait for it to go onto the overpass, but it took so long. We were also legitimately convinced for a second that these cars were going to derail because, man, this track work is bad. Anyways, there was really nothing up on the overpass, and there were roads down by where the locomotive was, so we decided to go down there. And as we were going down there, first we spotted this Union Pacific SD70M on the other side of the yard. And as we were climbing down from the overpass to get into our car, we heard the sound of an IHB local approaching. I didn't have time to get my camera out, so I just stared at the tracks and waited for it to pass. And IHB 3800 was leading it. You know, the Veterans Unit, aka the coolest looking engine on all of IHB and the coolest Veterans Unit of all time. I was extremely angry, so we jumped into the car and drove down the road hoping to catch up with 3800, thinking that it would maybe stop to switch Gibson Yard. Then we ran out of road, and the train had managed to escape our grasp. Annoyed, we drove back down the road to take a look briefly at the two engines that were switching the IHB Gibson Yard today, and, not just plowing through. Those two locomotives were a Union Pacific SD70M and another IHB SW1500 in the older Tennessee Orange scheme, which honestly I think looks way better than the current IHB scheme. I don't know how many locomotives are left in the scheme, but I know it's not very many, so I was kind of glad to see this unit. The Union Pacific crew were definitely making me feel uneasy because they were death staring me straight in the eyes out of the side of their unit. Ugh. The SD70M stopped for a bit, and 1523 accelerated, giving me this shot of it doing so. I noticed that all the locomotives here seem to be really old, and that was definitely solidified by the Norfolk Southern -9 sitting just on the other side of the overpass. It was around now that we realized there was no fence on the other side, so we headed over there to get clean shots of both the SD70M and the IHB SW1500, starting with the SD70M. And then, of course, the 1523 once again. The orange really pops in this shot. As 1523 continued to push its cars into Gibson Yard, the SD70M roared into life and headed back forwards. You can't see it here because it's out of frame, but any second now it should cut to the shot with the SD70M. Hold up, just give it a second. Just hold up. There we go. Yeah, why did I do that? Can you tell this video is unscripted? Can you tell all my videos are unscripted? Anyways, here's the shot. As the loco stopped, I was satisfied with the shots I had gotten of these two, and so I decided to move to the next spot in Gibson Yard, which I had scouted out on Google Maps a couple months prior to the trip. We headed down the side of Gibson Yard and eventually came across the one and only road that takes you any closer to this side of the yard. And what was parked there? Well, two Wisconsin and Southern SD40-2s. I'm pretty sure they're currently owned by WAMX Leasing. Why are they sitting here? I don't know. To my knowledge, they've been sitting here for at least 2 years. Have no idea if they'll ever move, but they probably will eventually, and they'll probably never come back. And these guys are pretty far away from any Wisconsin Southern territory. I'd recommend you shoot them if you're ever in the Hegewisch/Hammond area. After that, we decided to head to the other overpass that goes over Gibson Yard in hopes of seeing the war bonnet again. As we were driving over, we noticed two things. First, a slug set far off into the yard switching, and, some fire trucks. Because apparently there was a line-side fire here in Gibson Yard. And as you can see, it's still smoking by the time I arrived. There were 2 fire trucks on site and another one that arrived later. Meanwhile, the slug set with a regular IHB SW1500 and one of the heavy weighted down slugs rebuilt from an NW2 was doing some switching far away in the yard. Meanwhile, the firefighters began the process of dousing the area so that if a spark was to arrive there later from the still somehow active fire, then it wouldn't immediately catch everything on fire. Considering there was a natural gas oil refinery right next to this, that would be a massive issue if a large fire sprang out. And, yeah, there's the war bonnet. Oof. Meanwhile, the slug set was finishing switching. Also, it was absolutely miserable up here. The winds were ridiculous on this day, and the passing cars were blowing the sand that was dropped on the bridge in the winter directly into my face and onto my camcorder. It was an absolute mess. I was going to wait for the slug set to come underneath the overpass so I could get a better shot of it, but it just took so long, and I was constantly getting sandblasted. I just was not going to stay up here any longer than I needed to. And so I grabbed this one last final shot of the slug and then left. Gibson Yard was certainly not as interesting as we expected it to be, so we decided to head down to the actual locomotive shops at the end of the yard in hopes of finding something interesting. And there was a loco parked there, one of the rebuilt IHB locomotives, the RP15 something or another. These things don't look very good, and I honestly kind of hate them. After that, we were supposed to go to Michigan City. However, since Gibson Yard was so underwhelming, we had a lot of time to burn. And so we decided to go to pretty much the only good filming spot in between here and Michigan City, Griffith, Indiana. This spot is infamous because it's where 2 separate CN lines, the J subdivision and the South Bend subdivision, cross each other. As soon as we arrived, we noticed this stopped CN local off in the distance. At first, I thought it was a Grand Trunk unit, and for literally the entire trip, I legitimately thought it was a Grand Trunk unit, because my screen was so dark that I couldn't see using the zoom lens. But now that I actually have the footage, you can clearly see this unit is actually a CN repainted Illinois Central Jeep, number 3103, just without the logo on the front, for some stupid reason. So, hey, at least that means that I didn't miss anything rare. In Griffith is more than just a filming spot because there's also an actual museum featuring an E&JE caboose, a World War I era troop sleeper that was converted from a boxcar, and an Erie Lackawanna caboose. The EL used to pass through here, but that line was ripped up and abandoned. Then our first train arrived, a CN manifest with a GEVO leader. However, it came on the other line that I didn't even know existed, connecting the 2 lines together. Oof. However, there was a solo lead, so thankfully it did have a DPU which made up for that slightly. Also, just look at that Grinch Christmas-themed boxcar. Oh my god, that's so cool. And of course, the DPU had to be a boring CN GEVO. While waiting the absolutely redonkulous amount of time for the next train, I noticed pigeons were goofing around on the tracks. I really like pigeons, I just irrationally like them, okay? Don't ask. They're just so goofy. Anyways, it was a ridiculously long wait for the next train, as previously mentioned. Wonder what the train's gonna be. Some CN Givos or something? Maybe a local, maybe a Dash 9 or something? It was, in fact, a CN local, but as you can definitely tell, it was led by an Illinois Central SD-70 Death Star. These things are not rare in Griffith. Even though there was only 26 built, they practically go through here multiple times every single day, to the point where people have stopped even reporting them on heritage units. But there's only 26 of them, and I've literally never seen one lead before. The best I got was 2 trailing, and I didn't even turn the camera around to focus them. In contrast to the first one, the wait for the next train was not very long. And as it was approaching, we had a decision to make. Do we move down to the other area where the first train had popped up, assuming that this one will take the curve, or do we stay nearby the diamond and assume it'll go straight? I was really deliberating the choice, but thankfully some of the other foamers out on this day had a little thing called ATCS, which meant we knew exactly what train this was and where it was lined. And so, we knew it was going to take the turn. So, we headed down there. And thank God we did have that ATCS, because this train's lash-up was amazing, just like the last one. CN 3230, a 100th anniversary Tier 4 Gevo, was leading, and CN 3945, an X-City Rail Gevo, was trailing second. Oh yeah! Also, thanks to ATCS, we knew there weren't going to be any other trains in Griffith for quite a while, so we decided to head to Michigan City as I still wanted to go there. Along the way, we ran into these 2 random Union Pacific locomotives, an AC-44C6M and Gevo, just kind of sitting off the side of the road. I don't know why they're here. And as we were making our way towards the first of our rail fanning spots, we got jump scared by a crossing going down, and then the South Shore 5 o'clock train with the double-decker Metro-looking cars rushed through. The previously mentioned first rail fanning spot was supposed to be the yard where coal trains stop and drop off their cars at the NIPSCO plant, but sadly there was only cars and no locos. So we decided to make our way through a very complicated series of roads because, man, Michigan City is not easy to navigate, but thankfully my dad got on at the station for basically like 3 years, the Carroll Avenue Michigan City station. Once we arrived, we found the double-decker units we had just seen sitting at the platform, because apparently they were terminating here, and soon enough, they headed into the yard. These cars made an absolute ruckus pulling into the yard. I have no idea why the double decks are so loud compared to the regular ones. I guess they're just heavy. Anyways, hiding behind them were two South Shore Jeeps, which I obviously hadn't seen up to this point, considering they were hiding behind the very tall and very fat double-decker sets. They were 2001, which is a normal South Shore Jeep in the standard livery with no, intricate details or specialness about it really much. And then behind it was 2003, which is one of the honestly pretty lame veteran sticker units. They really should have done something cooler with the veterans units. I sadly couldn't get a good shot as this giant pole was in the way. Heading over to the shops, we see an assorted array of South Shore multiple units, including a 22 and a double-decker 314. Here we see 805, which is actually a patch to Iowa Interstate SD38, which is interesting. The black areas are original Iowa Interstate paint, and then the yellow areas were painted over with South Shore. Interesting. Also, 2010 was in the yard, because of course it was. And so is 804, the other ex-Iowa Interstate SD38, and there you can see the double-decker set, which just pulled in. Speaking of pulling in, this random train we absolutely were not expecting came through. It wasn't shown on the timetable because it was terminating here and not picking up any passengers, and we were going off the timetable for what trains we would eventually see. And this one didn't appear on it, so we were a little confused. As that train, led by 105, rolled into a stop at the platform, I noticed this really weird-looking South Shore multiple unit shuffling through the yard all by itself. It doesn't have number boards on the front. I don't even know if it has a number. And the front just looks a little bit different from all the others with less detail. And also, it's running on its own, which is something that South Shore multiple units don't do often. I legitimately have no idea what this unit is. If anybody has any clue, tell me. While I was still confused about that thing, and I honestly still am, the 105-led train rolled into the yard and prepared to terminate. Except it only made it about halfway because the engineer had to get out and flip a switch to take it onto the correct track into the yard. Once that unit pulled away, we headed back to the regular platform to take a look at the Jeeps once again. We were shocked when a crew walked up to them and started firing them up. They were super nice and actually told us what they were doing. They were going to depart with the Kingsbury local, which is the local that I actually see pretty often because it runs right next to my house. Anyways, they told us they were going to depart in 5 minutes, so we decided to chill and wait for that. I was going to get an awesome shot of the startup of 2001, but the wind came in and absolutely ruined the audio, so oof. Then, the only train we caught that day that we actually did see on the timetable arrived. This was a slightly early westbound led by 108, which is actually quite an interesting unit, because it has a appreciation sticker, advertisement, not sure what you would call it, for the Chicago Cubs on the side of the unit. And in typical commuter fashion, a very short time later, it departed. And we get to see that 34, one of the units buried in the middle of the consist, actually also has a special appreciation sticker, this time for the Indiana Dunes State Park. After that left, we waited for the Jeeps to move and noticed this South Shore caboose number 1916. I genuinely have no idea why it's here or what South Shore Freight uses it for. Anyways, as anticipated, after a while, the two South Shore Jeeps roared into life and headed down the track. Even though we knew they were going to depart soon with a full freight, we had already seen these two locos plenty of times and taken a lot of pictures, and it was getting kind of late, so we decided to leave. Unfortunately, the main motivation for going to Michigan City at all was to see the soon-to-be-demolished coaling tower on the CSX Michigan line. But I, completely forgot. Yay. So I guess I'm going back to Michigan City someday. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed this documentary covering this absolutely mixed bag and complete mess of a trip. Make sure to come back next time for another documentary that's hopefully a little bit more focused than this one was. Catch 'em while you can.